being here tonight, being with us this evening, and we have. It might be easier to name those who are not ill. He's up here, Felicia. You're welcome. Yeah, don't want to single you out or anything like that, but um, uh, not trying to make light of it, but it might be easier to list those who are well than those who are sick. Um, but let me go through this list, and then if there's something more or someone more that you others that need to be added, you let me know. Glenn, excuse me, Glenda Sullivan is in the hospital right now. Um, Bert Yancey, who is Wayne's brother, many of you know. Bert is in the hospital. I'm sorry, what? She did come home. Glenda did. Okay. She's not in the hospital now. All right. Bert Yancey, they found a malignancy. He is or was in the hospital as of last night, and what I heard. Of course, Jerry Matta, Steve Hill, Lucy Richardson, and Sandy Lathrop, who is Christine's daughter, Sharon's sister, who lives in Orlando, that all going through cancer treatment. Ishard, who is the teenage boy that in Grenada that I shared with you, and many of you were so generous to. I was able to, by the way, collect $5,000 to send down there for him to get this the surgery and treatment that he needs. He's in Guyana right now, and he's had his second round of chemo. He's doing okay. He's apparently tolerating the chemo okay at this point. William Sapp still making improvements, and Susan Berry's uh, daughter has stroke-like symptoms that she's been experiencing, going through that. Um, and then Pam Barnes, who had back surgery earlier this week, um, has had some quite a bit of complications as a result of this. Um, they believe that they tore the dural when they went in there, and so she's been in just extreme pain and has had to be laying flat. And he said Jay said she was able to sit up today and was looking better, but they've had to keep her in the hospital much longer than they thought, what they anticipated. So be sure to keep Pam in your prayers, especially for the relief of the pain. Okay, anything else that you all know of? What? Oh, okay, Marilyn Cameron. Yeah, okay. And Randy said he was sick. Marilyn was sick, and he just shot her. So he told me. So, what he said. Um, okay, Carl. Okay, all right. Oscar Chairs started chemo. This another round of this chemo, and just praying that he can tolerate that. Okay, yes, ma'am. Linda. Oh, good. Okay, good, good. Okay, Nate. Okay, okay. Yes, ma'am. Tammy. Oh, yeah. Okay, all right. That's Tammy's brother. You said brother-in-law. Okay, having to have some severe dental work and beyond because of chemo. Like I said, be easier to announce those who are well. With all of you. Anything else that you know? I'd say on a good note, my wife is improving. Her knee is getting much better. She's able to get around much better, doing better. So that's good news as well. All right. What? No? All right. Let's pray. Father, thank you for allowing us to be here tonight. Um, we know that there are this long list of people that not just not just names to us, but their family, their dear brothers and sisters who are struggling in different ways, and it has an effect on us as well. But we're especially asking, Lord, that you'll intervene and that you'll work with these ones, those who are undergoing cancer treatments, that they'll continue to be able to tolerate the chemo that's being given to them and that it will do its desired work. We're praying, Lord, for a continual improvement with William Sapp and Glenda Sullivan as well, and Susan Barry's daughter. And with Pam Barnes, with this unfortunate result of the surgery and the pain she's been experiencing, Lord, we'd ask you to surround her and be right there in her presence and relieve, lift up some of the pain from her, that she'll be able to continue to make improvement, and that the surgery will actually be a success. We're asking, Lord, you be with us tonight as we open your word, as we think about things that are beyond us and beyond this world, and think about the spiritual thoughts that come to us through your loving hand. Pray that you'll be with all those who are grieving as well, the loss of loved ones, and help them. And we're praying this all in Jesus' name. Okay. I mentioned a week or so ago that we're in what is more often called the practical section of the book of Ephesians. And we talked last week at length about the marriage relationship as it's an illustration of Christ in the church. And he's going to move into the relationship that we'll talk about tonight of children. And I just have to tell you that I was much, much better suited to teach this when I was 19. And I mean, Melissa and I had all the answers that you needed to know about children and child rearing, and then they were born, and everything just kind of seemingly changed. All that you thought you knew, all that worked with one child doesn't work with the other child necessarily, and so many different things from a practical standpoint that we struggle with. But we're in chapter 6 of the book of Ephesians tonight, verse 1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may turn out well for you, and that you may live long on the earth. So as he continues this practical aspect, he talks about, we talked about in chapter 5 and verse 21, that we're all to submit to one another. And then we read after that in chapter 5, verses 22 and verse 24, that wives are to submit to their husbands. Here he says now that children are to submit to their parents. The submission, he says, is to be in the Lord. So the children are to be obedient or submissive to their parents as long as it is in keeping with the will of God. If mom or dad are trying to present something or teach something or lead their children in a way that's contrary to the will of God, then they're not expected to be an obedient child in that regard, in that particular area. No obligation to heed or follow that. The Apostle Peter said when he was arrested and was standing before the authorities, and they were told not to preach any more in the name of Jesus. Peter said in chapter 5 and verse 29 of the book of Acts, we ought to obey God rather than men. So when he talks about children, obey your parents in the Lord, that is, as long as it's in keeping with or goes along with the will of God. But we live especially today in a fractured world. I mean, I grew up in a home that was shattered by alcohol of my father and then divorce of my parents. So, I mean, divorce was present then, but it wasn't nearly to the point that it seems to be today as far as the fracturing of families. Sometimes it is just idiocy on both the husband and the wife that lead to it. Sometimes it is just one or the other. Sometimes it's just unfortunate situations that come up. But I'm not sure how well we appreciate what the children go through in those situations. Because so oftentimes it's the husband and the wife who are at odds with one another for any number, whatever reason it might be, and they're just focused on this is what it is, this is how I feel, this is what I'm going to do, or whatever the case is. And sometimes the children uh, are not even thought about until it's like, oh yeah, now what? So it's an unfortunate situation. Um, Obviously, it's a terrible situation in that regard. So the first question in your book says, "Obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." So let me just, children are taught to obey their parents. So how do you teach a child to obey parents? How do you do that? Okay, of having consequences for disobedience, I guess is what you're suggesting. Okay, so you're expected to do this, this, and this, and if not, this is what happens. Okay, Nikki. Okay, okay, all right. So yeah, if I fly off in regard to all of those things and don't pay any attention to it, yeah, what kind of example that I'm setting through my children? Okay, see, okay, right. You might want to be whispering to the stomach of the mother as she carries the child. Look, son, this is the way it's going to be. Okay, but you're right. Starting out young, Carl. Okay, okay. So it's not just saying that we love them, but it really has to be shown that they can see it, feel it, understand it, and it be expressed in that way. What else? Uh, Consistency. Okay, yeah. I mean, because then, I mean, there's a rule that says this is what it is, and consistently showing that kind of thing helps to teach them. Okay, yeah. So there's a sense in which, I mean, I know the verse goes on to say honor your father and mother, but there's a sense in which we honor the child as well by showing that kind of love and respect. Um, yes, sir. Okay. Okay. Yeah, trying to surround them with good spiritual influence and direction and that kind of thing. Absolutely. I think those are all key. See? Okay. Okay. And obviously, first of all, we're not all good, consistent examples. So, what do you do? Huh? Do your best. But I mean, when you mess up, then what do you do? Yeah, you own up to it. I mean, if your kids are old enough to understand, obviously you've got a 3-year-old or 2-year-old that maybe don't get it, but as your children get older, when you mess up, I mean, hey, I shouldn't have done this yesterday or whatever, and there's no excuse, and I'm sorry, I shouldn't have been that way. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Yeah, a great way to show that kind of example to the children is a good husband wife relationship, which we just covered. I mean, which Paul just covered. So, Lynn, okay, yeah, yeah, absolutely, yes, sir. Okay, Yeah, I mean, as best you can. And again, there's a lot of unanswerable, and children do know that word why. So it is a matter of trying to deal with it as best you can at the time. Drew? Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that when you have a household that's filled with peace versus conflict and all this kind of stuff, when they feel the confidence, they feel the love, they feel peace, it's a whole lot easier for a child. It's a whole lot easier for any of us, and not just a child, to operate and function. And so, um, he's going to give two reasons why a child needs to obey their parents. He gives two reasons. The first one is because it's right. So look at it again. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. I mean, so there's the positive declaration. The first reason that children ought to obey their parents is that's the right thing to do. Just like I am a child of God, I ought to obey Him because that's the right thing. And so then the second reason He gives here, so it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. Now, I want you to look back at, we're going to look back at the book of Proverbs for just a minute. The book of Proverbs is filled with all kinds of great advice for parents. Um, again, as I said, when I was 19, before Michael was born, he was our first. Before Michael was born, I mean, I knew what to do and I knew all this stuff. I mean, come on. Anybody with half a brain knew what to do with children, right? And then he was born. So just all kind of went off the rails from that moment forward. Verse 8. Okay, listen, my son. Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 8. Listen, my son, to your father's instruction. Do not ignore your mother's teaching, for they are a graceful wreath for your head and necklaces for your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, don't listen, don't consent. If they say, come with us, let's lie in wait for blood. Let's ambush the innocent without a cause. Let's swallow them alive like Sheol, even whole like those who go down to the pit. We will find all kinds of precious wealth. We will fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot with us, and we'll have one money bag. My son, do not walk on the way with them. Keep your feet from their path, for their feet run to evil. They are quick to shed blood. Indeed, it's useless to spread a baited net in the sight of any bird, but they lie in wait for their own blood. Own blood. They ambush their own lives. Such are the ways of everyone who makes unjust gain. It takes away the life of the possessor. So what does the dad say here? I mean, what's his point? Huh? Well, listen to me, but I mean, what's his point? What's his whole argument? Don't hang around with those kind of people because what? You're going to get in trouble and it's going to lead you down the wrong path and oh, they may promise you great things, but you're going to have nothing but problems. And so the dad says, "Look, son, don't do this. Keep your feet away from it. Don't go down that path." Now, I mean, every parent who loves their child has said something similar at one time or another to them. Guy? Right. I mean, you just nailed me and a lot of other people in that. But you're exactly right. I mean, of thinking of them as, I mean, hey, you ought to have this figured out. We talked about this one time, 6 months ago or whatever. But I mean, the child is growing through all of these different, trying to understand life and what to do and how to do. And I think that's a very good point. Uh, he says this is the right thing to do, and maybe as an adult, I even understand it's the right thing for my child to do. But I do want to add something here. He's not talking. This is not directed towards toddlers and adolescent children. Okay? He's talking about children who are older, maybe even adult children in this concept, this passage here. I mean, yes, toddlers and adolescents should be taught how to do what mom and dad tell them, but that's not who he has in mind here. Okay, he has in mind those who are older and being trying to keep them out of trouble. Look in chapter 6 of the book of Proverbs. I'm going to read a few more verses here. Proverbs chapter 6, drop down to verse 20. My son, comply with the commandment of your father and do not ignore the teaching of your mother. I mean, is he talking to a 3-year-old here? No, I mean, no, obviously not. This is somebody who's old enough to listen, to learn, to understand what the father is saying. Do not ignore the teachings of your mother. Verse 21, bind them continually on your heart. Tie them around your neck. When you walk, they'll guide you. When you sleep, they'll watch over you. When you awake, they will talk to you. He says, for the commandment is a lamp, and the teaching is a light, and rebukes for discipline are the way of life. To keep you from the evil woman, from the smooth tongue of the foreign woman, don't desire her beauty in your heart, nor let her capture you with her eyelids. For the price of a prostitute reduces one to a loaf of bread, and an adulteress hunts for a precious life. I mean, he's talking to you. You're talking to your teenage or 20-something-year-old kids here. That's who is going to have this to deal with. And the dad is saying, look, son, don't go down that path. It's going to lead you to problems. And here's what's going to happen. It may look appealing. It may look appetizing to you. It may look like it's going to be great, but it's not. Look in chapter 30. Just read one more for you. Chapter 30 and at verse 17. The eye that mocks a father and scorns a mother, the ravens of the valley will pluck it out, and the young eagles will eat it. Okay. So, who's he talking to? No, no. So this is not kindergarten class, see, a 5-year-old. But I mean, I think that's an important point for us to get when we get into, again, back to the book of Ephesians where we are. Children are to obey their parents in the Lord, for it's the right thing to do. That's his first point that he makes, okay? It's right. The second question here, what does it mean then? He goes on to say, honor your father and mother. It will turn out well for you, and you'll live long on the earth. But what does it mean to honor your parents? What? Okay, show them respect in what way? Okay, okay. Well, that's kind of all right. Different take on that for sure. Uh, but what does it mean to honor your parents? To honor anybody? What does it mean to honor them? Okay, and as again, is he talking about 5-year-olds and second graders, 7-year-olds and whatever? Who's he talking to? Honor your father and mother. He's talking to older kids or adult children, okay, as to how we should treat our parents. Children are to place their parents in a position of high value or esteem, is what this means. It suggests the idea that a child recognizes the worth or the position or the love or the counsel or guidance, whatever, any of those kind of things that the parents have done, and they recognize it as being something valuable. And so, as a child, to honor your mother and your father means to hold them in esteem. Jesus gave commentary on this. In fact, in Matthew chapter 15, we just read this a couple of weeks ago. If you've been reading along with us. In Matthew chapter 15, here were some people who did the opposite. Okay? Then some of the Pharisees and the scribes came to Jesus, verse 1, in Jerusalem, and they said, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? For they don't wash their hands before or when they eat the bread." They had a very special way to how they were to wash their hands according to tradition. And so he answered and he said unto them, "Why do you yourselves also break the commandment of God for the sake of your tradition? For God has said, Honor your father and mother, and the one who speaks evil of father or mother is to be put to death. But you say, Whoever says to his father or mother, Whatever I have that would help you has been given to God. He is not to honor the father or mother. And by this you have invalidated the word of God for the sake of your tradition. You hypocrites, Jesus said. Rightly did Isaiah say, This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts far from me, and in vain do they worship me, teaching us the doctrine, the commandments of men. So he's addressing people who thought they were so religious that they said, well, everything that I have, everything that I own has been dedicated to God. And so here's mom and dad, and they're in their older age, and they need some help financially. And you say, sorry, I've already devoted everything I've got to give God. And he says, you're invalidating the word of God with that, with your tradition. Now these Pharisees thought how righteous they were, how good and godly they were to devote everything that they had to God. And what he says is, you have a first and a practical standpoint of you need to take care of your parents. Honor your father and mother. That's what God had said. So this second part of the commandment, he says, that it may be well with you, turn out well with you, and that you may live long on the earth. So besides Mickey's daughter, oh, okay, all right, good. That's good. That that in case she's watching tonight, hey, well, all right. So God often associates good living with long life. It's not always the case, but that God does associate. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 13 to 16. You might look at that. But parents who love their children lead in the ways that will bring their children into a covenant relationship with God. And he says, and you can live long, and he says, on the earth, he's not talking about in heaven, spiritual life. You can live long on the earth. Now, there are two places in the Old Testament. Leviticus chapter 20 and verse 9, and Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 18 to 21. These two passages said that if a parent had a child who was an unruly child, wouldn't obey the parents, wouldn't honor the parents, wouldn't do it, that the parent actually had the right to take this child out and kill the child, to stone the child. Now, that seems just completely out of the question, out of the pale of what happened. It was exceedingly rare, we're told by historians. We don't have any record of it happening specifically like this in the Bible. But, again, this is not referring to an unruly toddler or an unruly adolescent. He's talking about children who are a blight on society. Here is somebody, this child, he's grown up. He will not do anything the parents say. He is a problem. He's trouble. Everything about him is completely contrary to God. The picture is of a criminal type of behavior that a parent could take the child out and have the child killed. Now, as I said, it was exceedingly rare that ever happened, but it would make sense that God says, and you can live long on the earth, because if I don't do that, I'm not going to make it. So, yes. Sure. Yeah, to go back to the example standpoint that we talked about before, being an example for them, being constantly loving, supportive, and all that, you're right in that regard. Um, so, um, there have been moments with my three sons that I thought, well, we don't live under that, so I can't. And that's not really true. But I mean, there were moments that certainly you felt like you were being pushed to your limit with a child, um, and how somebody does or says or whatever the case is. But picture with me if you have this child now who, I mean, maybe he's 18, maybe 25, I don't know what his age is, and this child is so unruly and so on and so forth. And now you have the child and you're taking the child that you're going to go do. What do you think this child's doing thinking now? I'll change that. I'll be, that's why I say I think it was very, very rare that it ever happened historically, but it did happen. Um, and God had a specific rule or word that he addressed at least on that. Uh, so let me move on. Fathers, do not provoke your children. Verse 4. Do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord. Okay? I know I provoked my kids on occasion. I know that I provoked my children to anger. And I shouldn't have. But I know I was guilty of that on occasion. Uh, so, three verses that he talked about the children and what they do. So I have a question in your book here, number 3, and maybe it's not as much today. But why do you think there are so many fathers who leave child rearing entirely to the mother? I mean, that is still prevalent, but it certainly was more prevalent as you go back historically in time. Um, so, what do you think? Okay, some people thought it was the woman's work. Okay, what else? Okay, there were, yeah, I mean, and that I mean kind of fed into that same thing. Sure, yeah, it was just culturally whatever. True. Yeah, yeah, okay. But there was another reason for it, I think. Yeah, Rich. Okay. Yeah, I mean, and then of course in a lot of households, uh, you had the man who would go off to work and the woman, the wife who stayed at home and was a homemaker. I mean, that was more of a role for women, and so it was kind of like natural. She's around the children much, much longer than he is. He's gone for 8, 10, whatever hours a day at work. She's at home with the children. So it almost became then the norm that that's just what happens. That's how it's done. Yes, sure. Yeah, it starts out obviously very nurturing. The mother is the one that births the child, that feeds the child, and all of this. And so it's a very nurturing, tender picture of this. And the fathers sometimes were like, "Oh, I don't know what to, almost don't know what to do. Um, and it's not quite as much. It doesn't seem to be that way today. Um, but uh, but just to make sure that I'm clear on this, men need to step up and lead in their homes and love their children and purposely direct their children in leading them. He addresses the father. Fathers, this is how you're to live. This is what you're supposed to do. In Roman culture, fathers had absolute rule over the children. Kind of interesting. Uh, I'm teaching this tonight because Melissa and I were watching a clip from the movie Fiddler on the Roof last night or night before, um, and you know if you know that obviously his daughter wants to get married, but no, the papa has the rule and he gets to say who and whatever is the basis of this, and what is the basis of him doing all of this? Well, it's of course tradition. That's how it is. Fathers have this role and this rule. Well, in Roman culture, the father had absolute rule over the children. He could sell them into slavery if he wanted to. He could have them put in chains and have them work in the field if he wanted to. He could marry them off to better the family if he wanted to. He could withhold them from marriage. He could even kill his children. And sadly, history has examples of every single one of those things happening. Christianity not only lifted the role of women, it actually elevated very highly the role of children. Paul places the father in the role of the protector rather than the agonizer, the provider rather than the neglector. And it was not uncommon in some cultures during those days that if a child was born sickly or a child was born deformed, that they'd just take the child out and drown the child. The father had that option if he wanted. I mean, to know that was the culture, and then Christianity comes and elevates children, elevates fathers, elevates mothers in these rules, you see God's great love and how he did this. So fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. Bring them up in the nurture and the discipline of the Lord, he says. And do not antagonize to discouragement is actually what Colossians says in chapter 3 and verse 21. Sister Pastor said, don't provoke to anger and don't provoke to discouragement. Okay? And that's typically dependent upon the spirit of a child. Okay? Yes, sir. Okay. So she did the right thing and got angry. Is that what you're saying? Okay. Okay. But there's two. I mean, how you provoke a child. You're right. It could be done in different ways. But I think there's two. When you look at Ephesians and you look at Colossians, you have two different mindsets or character or will of a child. Okay. You can provoke one, and their result or reaction is anger. Okay, that's kind of how they're hardwired, I guess we might say. And you have another child, and you deal the same way with that child, and they just are crushed under that same kind of thing. So it may be the exact same words, maybe the same. In fact, you could have the same study, and one child responds with anger, one child responds with discouragement. Fathers, he said, don't do that. Don't provoke them to anger. Don't provoke or antagonize them to discouragement. How do you learn? How do you know how to do that or not do that? How do you learn not? Okay, okay, okay. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, Melissa and I have three sons, and I mean, I don't know how many times Melissa and I have had this discussion about how we could deal with Michael, or how we could deal with Ryan, or how we would deal with Craig. I mean, and we knew that. I mean, if I did this with Michael, wouldn't make any difference at all. Okay? If I said this or she wouldn't make any difference. Ryan or Craig, you could say this too, and that just said, okay, Dad, you're right. I'm sorry. Whatever. I mean, and something else would work with Michael that wouldn't work with the other. But that comes from knowing your children, learning about your children, watching your children, seeing how they respond. So um, it's just important for us to try to understand it. Okay, so let me move on to slaves just quickly. And I asked the question in your book actually: um, is it fair for us to use this? Look at what it says. Slaves, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in the sincerity of your heart, as to Christ, not with eye, not by way of eye service as men pleasers, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. With good will render service as to the Lord and not to people, knowing that whatever good thing each one does, he will receive this back from the Lord, whether slave or free. Ask your question number 4 in the book. Is it fair to apply this to the servant master relationship? Is that fair to compare that to the employer employee relationship? I know it's been used a gazillion times, but I mean, is that a fair correlation? Okay. In what way? How come you would feel that way? Okay, but what's the major difference between a slave relationship, slave master, and a employer employee relationship? Ownership. Okay. Yeah. Huh? Okay. Slaves don't clock out. Ownership. Or, I mean, if I want to put it in terms of employer employee, I can quit, right? I mean, most jobs, it might be more in keeping with a military role where you're in and you're in. I mean, yeah, you can get drummed out of the military as well, but you can't just now. I don't want. I'm not going there today. I don't want to do that today. March how far? No, I don't want to march. I don't feel like marching. My legs are sore from marching yesterday. And your DI, your drill instructor says what? Okay, we're either marching or I'll march you over here. Okay, I mean, basically, I mean, he's in control. But I mean, realistically, on a job setting, the major difference is I can leave that. But there are correlation, I think, that should be similar to what we have. He said to be obedient with fear or respect, uh, not to be one who just serves with eye service, but to do the will of God. Yeah, I can remember very well when I was in high school. I had a job. I worked at a men's clothing store and in Tampa, and my manager was pretty, let's say, chill today. He was pretty chill. It was easy to get along with. We worked fine. Everything was great. Jack was a great guy just to work with. Well, the district manager moved his office into our store upstairs in the back room. Like, oh no, Mr. Howard is here. And he's in our store constantly because this is his office. Okay. So, I mean, it was just horrible. We had to work all the time because Mr. Howard was there. But if you go up into his office, it was kind of like, okay, everything's all right now. We're cool for a while. Everything's okay, because we had there were wooden stairs from the top down to, and we could hear Mr. Howard every time. He's coming. He's coming. Okay, so everybody jump up and we're straightening shirts. Oh, hardly even noticed you, Mr. Howard. Whatever. Um, but I mean, that was nothing more than eye service. Okay? That was nothing more. I was as guilty as I could be, as was every other person in the store. But uh, anyway, he says I shouldn't do that. That's not how I'm supposed to work. I'm supposed to work as if Mr. Howard was standing right next to me the whole time. I mean, realistically. And more than that, I should be working as unto the Lord and say, what does God want me to do? How would he want me to act? What would he want me to say? How would he want me to respond? And be that kind of person. Because he goes on to say then on the flip side, and masters, do the same thing to them, so that is they should be kind as well, but give up threatening, knowing that both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no partiality with him. So part of the responsibilities on the employee, part of the responsibilities on the employer, okay, or the boss and the underling, or whatever role it is maybe that we have. But imagine the problems that could be solved in the work world if this is how we operate, okay? If this is how we both operate. And he says also as an added responsibility for the masters not to threaten or intimidate or rule by force of power, that should be a respect kind of role again. Now, how can a boss today in an employer-employee relationship, how can a boss threaten or intimidate an employee today? I mean, obviously he's not going to beat him or shouldn't. So what's he going to do? But, okay, yeah. I mean, I know you're dependent on this job. You have family at home or whatever, and hey, you don't do this, I'll let you go. I'll fire you. I'm tired of your attitude, whatever it is that the person says. Um, so I mean, he can do that. What else can he do? Cut their hours. Okay. File more, increase their workload. Exactly. I mean, just the exact opposite. Give them all of the drag. I mean, just the work job that nobody wants to do. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be done. So there is a responsibility on the part of both the slave and the master, or the employer and the employee. Okay, next week we're going to finish up